So wanted to start off by kind of explaining why I chose the theme question, the status quo. So it's actually originally one of the kind of pillars of the Haas Business School here, but more so I think it's because just growing up, I had never thought twice about how to view certain things growing up in a very suburban area. And so one thing that propelled me to decide to major in social welfare was when I took my first gender and women's studies class here at Cal, really taught me to kind of question the status quo, question, why there's gender-defined bathrooms, and question how gender has shaped us and how it regulates us as, an institution in society. So that was my kind of first dive into questioning the status quo, and that course really propelled me to take all these courses that I did within this human rights course thread to build upon my knowledge of that. So I'm going to run through the classes that I took. So 3 of them are all different departments, and then I'm going to try to tie them all together with some common themes that I found and some takeaways that I had from the classes. And then also talk about how I integrate my framework and foundation from all the learning that I did in these classes into my activities today, and even my business curriculum as well. And so one of the first classes that I took was called Poverty and Population, and so this one was in the public health department, and it really talked about how demographics and population pyramid and how it's shaped impacts economic growth. And so, for example, when you have a greater working age population, you have more economic growth in a country. And so this is because the young and the old people in society require more intensive care for health, education, and so it actually costs more to society as a result of that. And so there's a lot of countries in the world where they have to adapt to their aging populations. So one example is India. And so I think one of my main takeaways from this class is that a lot of times, government policy is something that affects the way population and demographic is shaped in a society. But most of the time, how these policies impact people is that it's the people who are kind of at the bottom of the economic ladder who get hurt the most. And so, this is not only everywhere around the world, but also in the United States, where a lot of government policies, most of the time when there are negative impacts, it disproportionately impacts the poor in society. And so the next class that I took was Asian Immigrant Women Workers in the Asian American Studies department. And this one was a very kind of hands-on course where we had a guest speaker come in every time from various nonprofits in Oakland and in the Bay Area. And so basically talked about how there's a lot of immigrants that are Asian who work in areas that have poor working conditions. So one main example that we covered in the class was nail salon workers and how they don't have the basic rights of having, a workplace where they feel safe. And so I really focused on these poor working conditions and not only the problems in society, but how kind of local community organizing can really fix those problems, and how all these nonprofits have taken steps to kind of mitigate the impacts of all of this and fight for the basic human rights of all of these workers. There were also a lot of intersectionalities addressed in these courses, from talking about racism and how that impacted the woman, to sexism in the workplace, to anti-immigrant sentiments. So all of these themes kind of came into play as each guest speaker came in. It was very apparent how these themes played in their life and how their role and these titles that are given to them impact their daily lives. And so the next class that I took for this course that was called Women and Disability, and this one was in the Interdisciplinary Studies department. And so this one kind of covered the intersections between being a woman and having a disability, but most of all I think highlighted the fact that disability doesn't really entail the stereotypes that Hollywood has perpetuated, or that what people just initially think of when you say disability. So it kind of reminded me of what I learned in my gender and women's studies class, which is that gender is not necessarily binary, just how disability is not necessarily binary as well. But throughout all of these classes, you realize that all these titles that you're given and all the stereotypes that are placed on you, that society places on you, kind of gives you a different status by nature. And so one thing in this class was called double jeopardy, where you're in double jeopardy essentially if you're a woman and you have a disability, and you're said in triple jeopardy if you're a woman of color as well. And so it's just how these kind of titles and stereotypes that are imposed on these people kind of played a role in their life. So it's kind of some common themes that I found throughout all of these classes. One was community and union organizing. And so, for example, in my Women and Disability class, we learned about the Deaf President Now movement, where beforehand, all these people with who had hard of hearing or were deaf had so many stereotypes imposed on them, and then people just really didn't understand them and like the situation and how they were viewed as not fully functioning individuals, and how this whole Deaf President Now movement changed that perception in the broader American society, and how very grassroots and local community organizing can really dispel these stereotypes. Another one was policy advocacy, and how a lot of nonprofits and lobbying can help impact and shape government policy, and how the government has the capability to improve lives throughout history. So an example in the Women and Disabilities course was how the Deaf President Now movement actually ended up in the most reform that's been passed in the last 80 years for people with disabilities, and how that action happened so fast because people demanded change quickly. And lastly, one is health and safety, and so how health and safety interacts with broader factors such as your status in society, how if you're low on the economic ladder, then how you have kind of less resources in order to benefit your health, and how if you are given certain statuses, for example, people of color often have less access to health and resources because of lack of insurance and other resources like that, and how those kind of delegations by society impact your health and safety. And so some kind of insights that I had was that originally I personally define human rights as a right that's believed to belong to every single person that is born in this world. But before I came to Cal, I kind of thought of this more in the international context. And a lot of people think about human rights in terms of international human rights or Human Rights Watch and those types of activities. But after taking all these courses, realized that on our everyday basis and in our everyday experiences, there's many injustices to human rights that are being occurred right in front of our eyes. Every time you go to a nail salon, it's these workers don't have certain rights that many other people do. And so I saw kind of all this stuff happening on a more local basis, and even at Cal. So that's kind of one of my insights from the course. And one other insight that I had was action. So at first, before I came to Cal, I didn't really think that one single person can make much of an impact, and didn't think local community organizing can make much of an impact either. I thought the government is this huge, large institution, and it's only the government policymakers who can do anything. But after taking these courses, realized that it's actually mostly community organizing that propels even government officials to take action and make change in terms of policy. And really found that even one person can make a difference from listening to all the nonprofit speakers, listening to how every single one of them helps individuals, all their nonprofits. Really made me get more involved in getting into volunteering with these nonprofits and also thinking in a different way. And so in terms of my outside class experiences, so decided to be a social welfare major after taking all of these classes, and so have gotten involved in a lot of local nonprofits. For example, the Women's Economic Agenda Project in Oakland, where they mainly do workshops and protests and a lot of local community organizing in order to address human rights for women in Oakland. And then have also gotten involved in policy advocacy. So I've gone to Capitol Hill to lobby for global vaccine access, and so that was a really great experience, and felt that it was really cool to get involved in that as well. Actually started learning ASL after my Women and Disabilities course, just because I got more interested in deaf culture and that whole community and wanted to learn more about it as well. And also just personal application. So I think I found a lot of the things coming into play as a business major. So one huge topic that I would like to integrate everything that I learned from my human rights course thread into my business applications in the working world is corporate ethics. And so I think this is a really interesting topic when you think about how corporations can even potentially help add value to business in a social justice framework. And so thinking about how not only how nonprofits can help society, but how businesses can be shaped to be value-driven to society. So how do you make it so that Walmart is more fundamentally environmentally friendly, and it saves Walmart money, but it also has positive impacts on the environment? How do you shape business so it can actually has positive value to society? It's just one thing I want to approach kind of my career with. So thank you for listening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.